New satellite imagery revealed a huge convoy of Russian armor and artillery heading towards the under-siege areas of eastern Ukraine as both sides gear up for a brutal new phase of the war. The images, taken by Maxar Technologies late Friday and released early this morning, showed the 8-mile-long convoy of weaponry snaking through the town of Veliki Burlik. The convoy was heading south through an arc of Russian-controlled territory in eastern Ukraine according to analysts, and is believed to be destined for the front lines in the regions of Luhansk and Donetsk. Russian forces withdrew from key positions around Kyiv last week in the face of bitter resistance from Ukraine's armed forces and are thought to be regrouping for a major new offensive in the Donbas. But the losses inflicted by Ukraine on Russia's army are so great that the Kremlin has resorted to recruiting retired military personnel to make up the numbers, according to the UK's Ministry of Defence. The intelligence suggests that Vladimir Putin is turning to personnel who were discharged from military service as early as 2012 to replace his fallen soldiers, with Ukraine's armed forces putting the Russian death toll at close to 20,000. Russia's military is also thought to be recruiting soldiers from the Transnistria region of Moldova, which in March was designated an occupied territory of Russia by the Council of Europe. The Kremlin's attempts to replenish its strained fighting force come as a top Ukrainian official declared Ukraine is ready to beat back Russia in the eastern Donbas region before sitting down to negotiate a peace deal with Putin. Mikhailo Podolyak, one of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's closest advisors, told reporters late last night, Ukraine is ready for big battles. Ukraine must win them, including in the Donbas. Once that happens, Ukraine will have a more powerful negotiating position. After that, the presidents will meet. Podolyak's statements came as Zelensky hosted British Prime Minister Boris Johnson in Kyiv after defense officials said Russia's withdrawal of forces from around the capital made it safe for the visit to go ahead. The PM's presence was intended to be kept secret until he had left the war zone, but was mistakenly announced in a mid-afternoon tweet by Ukraine's embassy to the UK. At a joint appearance with Zelensky, Johnson said the Ukrainian people are a lion, and you are its roar as he vowed to send Ukraine 120 armored vehicles and new anti-ship missile systems to help beat back the oncoming Russian offensive in the east. Now that another Russian convoy is approaching the eastern front, the same as the one that was approaching Kiev, the question is whether the Russian occupiers will suffer the same fate as in the north of Ukraine.
Russia lost 137 helicopters in Ukraine, Defense Ministry. During 45 days of the war in Ukraine, Russian forces lost 137 helicopters, which is much more than in the 4 wars they fought earlier. The relevant statement was posted by the press service of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense on Facebook, Ukrinform reports. For comparison, during 45 days of the war in Ukraine, Russia lost 137 helicopters. In the First Chechen War, Russia lost 21 helicopters, in the Second Chechen War 36 helicopters, in the war in Georgia 3 helicopters, in the war in Syria 23 helicopters. That is, during 4 wars, Russia lost 83 helicopters, the Defense Ministry said. As reported, between February 24, 2022 and April 11, 2022, Russia lost about 19,500 troops in Ukraine, 725 tanks, 1,923 armored fighting vehicles, 347 artillery systems, 111 multiple launch rocket systems, 55 anti-aircraft warfare systems, 154 aircrafts, 137 helicopters, 1,387 motor vehicles, 7 boats/cutters, 76 fuel tanks, 119 unmanned aerial vehicles, 25 special equipment units and 4 mobile SRBM systems.
Members of the Ukrainian Defense Forces found a destroyed Russian Sukhoi Su-34 jet as they inspected the damage to a residential area in Chernihiv city on Friday. Russian troops had withdrawn from the northern Ukrainian city, officials said on Monday. Chernihiv Governor Vyacheslav Chos has accused Russian troops of planting mines as they drew back from positions around the regional capital. Reuters could not independently verify the allegation. According to the reports, Ukraine armed forces downed the Russian jet fighter using British-made Starstreak manpads. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine on February 24, more than 10 million people have been displaced from their homes. Russian President Vladimir Putin calls the action a special military operation aimed at demilitarizing and denazifying Ukraine.
Putin humiliated as scared soldiers abandon tanks in hasty retreat. A Western official described Moscow's operations in Ukraine as disastrous, saying the abandonment of a lot of equipment could be hinting at a collapse of the will to fight a war launched by Putin over 6 weeks ago. The unnamed official told a news conference, "We can confirm that there are no longer units in northern Ukraine. It has been a pretty hasty withdrawal by Russian forces, and there's a lot of Russian equipment which has been abandoned in that hasty withdrawal, and that's only going to exacerbate the challenge they have in terms of the refurbishment and reconstitution of their forces as they remove them both into Belarus and into Russia. Some of it is kind of unclear as to why it's been abandoned, because you might have thought there is some of these vehicles are still usable, and you think they would have been able to take, and I think there's something around the collapse of morale and the collapse of the will to fight." The remarks come amid obvious difficulties on the Kremlin's end to seize any major Ukrainian cities. NATO will deploy a permanent full-scale military force on its border with Russia. NATO will deploy a permanent full-scale military force on its border with Russia to defend its territory against a future Russian invasion, the alliance's chief said during an interview with The Telegraph. NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg told the newspaper that the alliance was in the midst of a very fundamental transformation that will reflect the long-term consequences of Russian President Vladimir Putin's actions. "What we see now is a new reality, a new normal for European security," Stoltenberg said, per The Telegraph. "Therefore, we have now asked our military commanders to provide options for what we call a reset, a longer-term adaptation of NATO." The alliance currently has a small tripwire presence to the west of Russia. NATO troop numbers have increased tenfold to 40,000 since the invasion of Ukraine, the Daily Mail reported. The reset will involve deploying sufficient forces to repel any offensive on NATO nations by Russian troops, per The Telegraph.
Ведуться роботи по розмінуванню вибухово небезпечних речовин. Прохання всіх залишатися у себе вдома, не підходити до вікон. Назад!
Готов? Готов. Заряжай. Огонь. Что с автоматом нормально? Да.
Увага! Ведуться роботи по розмінуванню вибухово небезпечних речовин. Прохання всіх залишатися у себе вдома, не підходити до вікон.
Thank you.